All right, this is good deja vu. Welcome back, David.
Thanks. Great to be here with you, Mark.
You too, man. You're doing some super stuff, and I can't wait to get into it. And so, how about just, if you will, formally introduce yourself and tell a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Dr. David Bray. My official role is that as inaugural director at the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center, where we focus on how data and technology is changing the world, how it's changing geopolitics, and how geopolitics change technology and data. Also, in different capacities, I focus on how we can move the world forward in a way that has empathy, thinks about people-centered approaches. This is both things that I do in a formal work capacity, but also trying to help as a volunteer with different startups and other organizations that want to think about how we can make sure we remain open societies and that technology is human-centered as opposed to the alternative.
Yeah, you've always been a leader in that, and I love it. I want to ask you, everybody talks about their why, and I had someone recently saying, I do my what first. I'm not doing my why, I do my what, then I do my why. But the real question is, why do you do what you do?
So there's probably two answers. The one answer that I tend to give people is the world is changing. And if we don't have some foresight about where it's going, we are going to be surprised. And unfortunately, people are going to get hurt, or people are going to, even worse, or it's not going to benefit people. They're going to get ostracized or alienated or locked in imprisonment, whether real or physical or virtual. That doesn't help people. And I've seen that happen so often. I was in South Africa in 1998, and obviously there was the legacy of apartheid, but there was also the questions about the future and where they could go. And I learned a lot from being in the township of Khayelitsha. That later impacted me when I was later with the CDC's bioterrorism program, trying to make sure that we didn't have a bad day that caused the loss of lives. Later was in Afghanistan, also trying to link humanitarian efforts with efforts on the ground there. And so there's one why, which is just simply trying to make sure that we have foresight that tries to help mobilize people to make sure wherever we go in this changing world, it uplifts as many people as possible. And that we don't have the loss of lives or livelihoods or property in the process of that, and we remain open societies. And the other reason why, I don't want to be bored. And so I look for the really hard problems, sometimes the thankless problems, sometimes the ones that people say you're crazy or you're wrong or they're not ready to see what's out there invisible. But at least at the end of the day, I know that I'm applying my skills to where it's needed, and it's definitely a challenging topic.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, they won't necessarily believe it because it's invisible. And now we're having all these arguments about such a hard task to wear a mask, right?
Well, I like what you said about that. Is one of the tenets I've learned, I guess, through the School of Hard Knocks is the most important thing I think any leader can do is to make visible that which is currently invisible to a organization, a society, a team.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the leader needs to recognize you're probably not going to get rewarded. We have the phrase, which is, don't shoot the messenger. Well, if you need to have a strategy for when you help that organization or society process that which is currently invisible. And there are plenty of things that I think are being reminded of us in our society at the moment in terms of historical injustices, lack of inclusion, lack of diversity. But you need to recognize that whenever you make the invisible visible, there will be people that are going to shun you, they're going to push you aside, and actually try to possibly either metaphorically or physically kill you, because that's challenging their current worldviews in ways that they may not be ready for yet.
Yeah, I won't get into the whole religious thing, but that's something religion's a lot of times worried about. If you find something that's going to alter blind faith, if you will, and I just find it fascinating. My mom always used to say, we're talking about sayings. My mom always used to say, if that's the worst thing that happens to you today, let me just insert there, like wearing a mask, then that's a great problem. That's the worst thing. And it just doesn't make sense to me. But it's taken decades. We've talked about this before a little bit. It's taken decades for corporate leaders to realize that it's a good idea to align with social impact. To your point about doing good things for the community, and I finally realized that not only is it good to get talent, because talent only wants to go with leaders who care, but it really is good for business. And you've been engaged in entrepreneurial business, you've been engaged in nonprofit, you've been engaged with major global issues, and for economic and social benefit, right? So you've partly answered this question, but I want to address it further. And I always think it's a little bit of a push question because you're talking about you, but how do you differentiate yourself as a leader who cares?
So I think the first thing is, I think I try to put forward the idea that I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to at least ask the interesting questions and learn from others. There's, I think, E. Cummings who said, always a more beautiful answer than ask a more beautiful question. I think that's what we need to recognize, is that leadership, at the end of the day, it's about creating the space in which people are willing to challenge the status quo, go beyond what's currently being done. And it's a separation, because management is meeting expectations, and we need management. But if all we do is meet expectations, especially in a turbulent world, we will fall behind. And so leaderships create the safe space. I sometimes say I'm a human flak jacket and digital diplomat, but the idea that you create a space in which it's okay to question and challenge, as opposed to shutting people down and saying this is the only way, or you're wrong, or that's not right, or you failed. I often tell people the word fail really should mean first attempt at iterative learning. Because that's really what we need, is leaders that are willing to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn. And at the same time, I tell people I'm a nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean I'm neutral. And what do I mean by that? So I've served in different contexts, both in public service as well as in the private sector. I think we need people that are willing to put aside identifying with any one tribal group, whether it's blue or red, left or right, whatever, and say, we're willing to try and bridge. And yes, it's not to say that you're wrong if you do have partisan views, that's okay. But nonpartisan doesn't mean you don't have values. That's neutral. Neutral is if you have no values. Nonpartisan is you say you have values, here's what I stand for, and anybody, whether it's from the left or the right, whatever, from different countries, different sectors, if you have those same values, then I stand with you. And if you don't, it doesn't mean I write you off, but it means that I do what President Lincoln said, which is, I do not like that person, I want to get to know them better. And so for me, I think it's just an inquisitive style of leadership, and one that's willing to be the one that's that flak jacket for others, so they can ask questions too. And we can explore and learn together as we try to figure out this changing world.
Yeah, that's so right on. I think, we recommend a program called Nonflict to a lot of our clients, and it teaches, among other things, that conflict is not a bad thing. You wouldn't have any new ideas if you didn't have any conflict. So embrace it, and embrace it. Same thing with diversity and whatnot. And it goes back to being a little kid. They say the only person that has no bias is a baby, until we give him or her bias. And the kid will ask, like, why is the sky blue? Da-da-da-da-da, there's the answer. But why? Da-da-da, but why? And that's great, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about. And doesn't that make things more interesting if you're like that? So segue into, if you will, and if you feel like taking off your jacket and getting casual like me, go for it.
I will. Happy to.
Thank you. Beautiful blue shirt. You got to go blue, man.
I'll even roll up my sleeves now.
Go for it. This is real stuff. My grandparents, this is what I'm saying, my grandparents always used to say, I'm sure yours and others, with a Kiev accent, they say, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing. And then they would say, and second is education. We got all this stuff going on, speed of technology, COVID, a pandemic. We thought we had our hands full then. And then we got racial injustice, and maybe the best opportunity in our lifetime for some amazing, amazing changes. And as you can imagine, people have had a little bit of time to think what's really important, connecting and how we connect. So I want to get your opinion, super valuable in this, about the future, local future, global future, in terms of awareness at work. What's our awareness at work? What's our awareness at home? How we play together. Basically, just what's going to happen with how we're all together in the future.
So it kind of gets part and parcel to, if there's any common theme to what I've done over the last 25 years, it really is trying to think about how humans use technology as a tool that is not just for individual advantage. I mean, that's all well and good, or even just for nation state advantages, but really about to connect truly as to what makes us human, with empathy, and to adapt to changing world. I mean, I think as much as we have challenges with technologies, in some respects, the civilization and the societies we produce have been a result of our doing our tool making. And so I think about what's happening with COVID-19, which is, some people say, it's a great accelerant in terms of we've gone digital faster than we thought we would in the last 5 or 10 years, simply in the last few months. And that's probably true. But I think we should call into question, which is, how do we want to work? How do we want to connect? How do we want to link working at home with our families present? How do we want to work with colleagues? You know, do we need offices in the future, or do we need just spaces where people can gather both virtually as well as physically, and then actually be able to try and figure out where they want to go forward together? These are all questions that I think they are things we need to ask. And then we also need to be mindful of the fact that still less than, we still have about 48% of the planet that still needs the internet. We haven't done that. Information, we've had gatekeepers in the past. Maybe we need to actually recognize that gatekeepers hold us back. And that, there's conversations about misinformation, disinformation. In some respects, this is a problem that's come to light because we no longer have just the big 3 or big 4 networks. And so, yeah, in some respects, we could go back to the way things were, but I'm not sure that's the answer either. I think what we really need is everybody can share data, they can share truth if they choose to, but it's about sharing your data and truth and then using what's sort of up here for all of us, which is, like you said, the education part, which is critical thinking. Does this make sense? Is someone trying to inflame my emotions for some purpose or something like that? I think that's a solution that doesn't require technology. It just requires people being empowered to have choice and to have critical thought. And so I think where we need to go, if there's anything I stand for, is that I hope in the next 5 to 10 years, we find ways to use technology to give people more choice and more freedom to do what they want, as opposed to what I feel like we spent the last 30 or 40 years in the digital space producing technologies that actually constrain your choices, platforms that constrain what you can do, and it takes away agency from people and agency from societies.
It's so good to hear, because remember when we first got technology, it was supposed to allow us to do stuff we wanted to do versus stuff not. And in some ways, especially in the US, we're working harder than ever, more than ever. Maybe this is finally at the point where it's going to allow people to not have a work-life balance where you end work, you start life, and then you stop your life to go to work. But it's actually, we're living and enjoying what we're working at, whatever it is. And I never believed in the term unskilled labor either.
I think that's absolutely right on. And I think, let me tell another story that I can share now, but in a past life, I got approached in 2015. I was already doing a government job, but they said, you have a reputation for helping solve some really thorny problems. One of the military starts very diverse, but by the time the president gets to pick his combatant commanders, so the 4 stars equivalents, they are all Caucasian white male. And they said, could you fix that? And I was like, give me a week and I'll circle back. I have to think about this. And I also said, could I form a team of 12? So it wasn't just me. But I knew I needed a diverse team to weigh into this. And so they allowed me to form a diverse team of 12. It wasn't just me. But we circled back in a week with an answer that said, could we use tools to recognize that people do have biases, unconscious, that if someone looks more like you, you feel more affinity to them. There's a reason for that in evolution, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it makes for a more diverse and inclusive society. So could we use tools where it creates an avatar so you don't actually know what the person looks like, or it masks the voice, you don't know if it's male or female? For example, for resumes, we know that data shows that if someone's name is more anglicized, they're 3 times more likely to be hired with the same exact resume than if the name is not anglicized, which is not right. And so what I really hope we can do when you talk about living and sort of embracing living is recognize that we are beautiful creatures. Humans are, not just humans, but animal life and plant life on the planet as a whole. But we're also flawed in some respects.
No way.
No way, I know. Crazy thought there.
Whoa.
But could we use tools and technology to recognize the beauty that we are and amplify that, and find ways to create new ways of working, new ways of coexisting, new ways of governing that are more beautiful and move towards that ideal that we all have? I mean, we the people is that ideal, but we recognize that we the people is something we need to move forward to as more. And so that's maybe the thing that I would like to make visible that's not currently visible in society, is we have not been as intentional in our tool uses as we would want to be. And we're surprised when we're moving more to autocratic chambers of thought or autocratic ways of behaving as societies that we don't want to become.
Yeah, no, that's super fascinating too. And I know at the beginning of this conversation, we were kind of, in a way, talking about, we were all connected before, but now we're actually starting to be connected more authentically with technology. We were blaming before we're connected, but it's technology, we're not really connected. Now, because we're at home or you're taking off your jacket or whatever, there seems to be an authenticity that we crave. And the one thing I always talk about, and it goes back to what my grandparents did, is this, and there's been studies on this, the thing that brings the most, fills our heart and soul the most is belonging to a community, whatever that community is. And we can use tools, like you're saying, to make that happen. How fortunate are we that we have that now?
Agreed. And I think the thing is that we need to recognize is that we all want to belong. What we need to do is find ways to make the we group, the in group, because we humans consciously have an in group, be all of us as a species. And not just be all of us as a species, but be all of us as a planet, which is hard. Because historically, for most of our time as a species, 30,000 years ago, you ran into 80 people on average in your entire lifespan, and most of them were your immediate family members. Nowadays, you can meet 80 people online, if not more. And then on top of it, online, you're not even sure if 80 of the people that you met online are actually people or bots. But we need to recognize this world we've changed is dramatically different than how our brains have been shaped through natural selection pressures. And that's okay, because now we have some intentionality we can do that can say, what are the spaces we want to create, whether it's for work, whether it's for coexisting, whether it's for playing or for family, so that we try to expand that we group to overcome the initial biases and limitations that make us flawed humans to be a more perfect society together.
Well, Dyson, the vacuum cleaner guy, whatnot, he's got his institute in London, and he hires engineers knowing that they have to fail. To your point before, they have to fail. And in a way, it should be the same thing with people. The more different people you meet, the more exciting it should be, basically, to include them. How do you see the current and even the upcoming, let's call them business leaders who care, playing their role in what we're talking about, in ensuring that there's a financial well-being, there's a physical well-being, and a mental well-being? All those are important now, the younger people.
So what I would love to see happen with the current regime of business leaders is, I recognize, business, there is a motivation to obviously deliver on value, deliver on shareholder value, deliver on ROI. And I know there's been talk about, can we think about a double or triple bottom line in terms of society and the planet? And I think that's good. But what I would love to see is, we may very well be in a world in which things are changing so quickly that things that used to be done solely by government can't, because you don't want your government to change overnight. Everyone who says they want government to move fast, I say, okay, and what if it does something you don't want? And that's immediately when they want the brakes on.
Yeah, good point.
You don't want government to change. You don't want the tax code to be written overnight if it's not going to be, if it's not thought through.
Right.
So government should move at a certain pace, but industry can move faster. And so in societies that separate their industry from their government, which I think is a good thing, can industry start to take on things that used to be done by government and involve the public in a way that engenders trust and collaboration?
Right.
Let me give you a concrete example. We saw how Google and Apple said they wanted the help of contact tracing. They did an app, they did a proposal that would have all these different privacy protections, but then still, according to Pew, 3 out of 5 Americans still didn't trust it. And what if instead of them doing it by themselves, the industry players said, we're going to involve community leaders, we're going to involve maybe nonprofit or a series of nonprofits, we're going to involve citizen juries so they can actually verify that, yes, the data from this is only being used for that purpose. It's being forgotten after 3 weeks. There's audits to make sure it's truly being erased and it's not being used for some other secondary purpose that you don't know about. But it's the idea that this is something where people are involved in co-production as opposed to having technology done to them. I think that would be game changing, and I think that's what industry leaders need to think about. The other thing is to think about, in this world in which maybe industry starts doing things that used to be done by government, because it's not just about creating value for that company, but it is about uplifting that community. And by uplifting that community, you uplift everybody and you actually create a better society for us all. Can we think about what is the role of what have been called think tanks, and recognizing I've joined one? To be honest, if all I do is think at a think tank, then I've failed. It's got to be action tank. What can industry do to work with these different partners to create this new way of coexisting and working together? Because I think otherwise you're going to find societies that do merge their public and their private. I mean, China does not have a distinction between their private and their public sector, and that's their choice. I'm not here to judge it, other than to say that model may outperform our current society that has these separations, because there's coordination challenges, there's a lack of trust. And so what can industry do to actually uplift, involve the public, build that trust, and then also involve thought and foresight for where we want to go together as more open societies?
Yeah, and we're both certainly in favor of public-private partnerships, but I think it could go way more, like you're saying. I mean, who's to say company A can come in to work with the government on the schooling process and really make it happen? Or you've seen companies donate people for a year to United Way, let's say. I mean, that's a simple example, but it's right on the money. That should happen, and it actually makes people feel great that it's happening if they're involved. And when you go back way back, where actually I was in Bali a couple of years ago, and the tour guide was telling us in their town, if someone sells a pig to someone, the community gets together to make sure it was the right price. I mean, basic, but hey, right?
It works. Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I think this is the idea that these really hard problems don't fit into any one sector, and they're kind of wicked problems because they're also changing as time goes on. But what we need to figure out is how do we, short of becoming a dictatorship, which makes it easy because you just decide a single narrative, which I don't think we're proposing.
right.
How do we actually get these different players to motivate from a bottom up, empowering the edge to solve these hard challenges? And I think you're right. People will find joy in it. I mean, I find joy. You know, I often ask people, one of the first questions when I'm looking at new staff or new employees or new team members, I say, what brings you joy? And partly because you want to see what motivates them. I find joy almost like solving the really hard problems. It's almost like, I know Sherlock Holmes was fictitious, but for when the game's afoot, I'm like, I'm excited, I'm charged, because it's a mystery, it's hard, there's going to be, you know, you're going to go different paths and you're going to say, no, that didn't work out, and figure it out. But there's just joy in trying to work together to solve really hard problems.
Yeah, how crazy is that if people were given something they loved, that it would work? What a crazy idea, David. I mean, you know, I had an influencer, long story, at Deloitte, that realized even though I was great at accounting and tax, I hated it. And he took me into the client relations marketing aspect of it, where no one else would. And, you know, it was a brilliant move by that guy for me anyway. So, I mean, if at this point right now, if you could make one dramatic change, now we've kind of hit it a little bit, and it's an unfair question because there's a bunch. If you could make one dramatic change right now, what would it be?
One dramatic change right now. That's a fun question to be tossed at. I think what I would do right now is that there was the ability for all of us, if we wanted to, it'd have to be consent-based, to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And maybe that's something that we may be getting to the point where, you know, I don't want to rush to a technology fix. And in some respects, narratives already do that to a degree. I think that's why we humans are storytellers. But we need to improve, maybe it's even just putting a focus on what can we do in this world that's increasingly becoming digital to help people be able to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Because I feel like we're missing that in a lot of respects, and then we're surprised when we're becoming more divided and more polarized and more distrustful.
That's a great answer. So the last quick question too. I'm a graduate. I'm ticked off. I didn't get a graduation. I couldn't bring my girlfriend to the prom, nothing, or whatever. It's high school, whatnot. And I come to you and say, this is crazy. What do I do? What's next?
Well, the thing is, there always will be a next. And what I would say is, yes, while this was clearly a bad time, like you said, that which you know, that which is it's going to define how this generation and how all of us going forward look at this great reset. And I think it's a great reset if we make it so. I think, you know, it's not going to be returning to normal. It's not even necessarily going to be a new normal. It is a reset in how we want to operate. And so I would say, if you're a new graduate, or if you're someone that may have lost your job because your company was impacted by COVID-19, reach out to your friends and colleagues, reach out to your colleagues and say, where can I find opportunity amidst everything that's happening? Because there is massive opportunity here. I mean, we're already seeing, for example, Home Depot and Lowe's, they have a new model where instead of you trying to navigate the store to find what you want, you show up, it's ready for you, you can pick it up. To be honest, even once we get back to when COVID-19 is over, I think that's something I would still love to do as a service. Mm-hmm. And so there are new ways of operating things. And so in times of crisis, there are opportunities. And I would say, whoever you are, as long as you have the ability to breathe and the ability to collaborate and be creative, This is an opportunity to say, where do we want to do with this great reset? Whether you want to look at it from a business perspective, from a society perspective, a community perspective, or at the end of the day, I think they're all connected by what is the social impact that we want to have for the next 5 to 10 years ahead.
Awesome. Well, as usual, you bring good think and action tank to the table. So really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, as always. And I look forward, hopefully it doesn't take another few years to pass before we find some other way to collaborate. Maybe we can have you over with the Atlantic Council too, because we need people that bring the heart that you have to think about this world being more connected with human empathy.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you. And we will look to make that happen.
Thank you.